I start, because of time constraints, I don't really talk very much. I'm not going to talk very much about this instrument in the actual paper. I just want to say it's called a laúto. It's as you can see, a long-necked steel string lute with movable frets. And rather than take time to retune it to make my point, I'm just going to say that it's generally tuned like this, which is C, G, D, A, more or less. It's called the shifting fundamental, Byzantine and Anatolian echoes in Cretan music. The traditional dance music of the province of Chania in western Crete belongs to the wider family of Eastern Mediterranean and Near Eastern modal musics. Despite modern trends towards harmonization of traditional melodies through the introduction of chordal accompaniment on the guitar and other instruments, older Chania musicians continue to perform the local music in a predominantly modal fashion, playing melodies in unison along with the fundamental pitch of the mode, thromos in Greek, marked by open drone strings played on the laúto. In this paper, I examine one peculiar facet of this modal performance, the practice of reorienting the modality of certain tunes by shifting their fundamental to a different degree of the scale. This is accomplished in two ways. One, by transposing the melody so that the new fundamental corresponds to the appropriate open string on the laúto, and two, by retuning the open strings of the laúto to correspond to the new fundamental. I posit that the reasons given by Chania musicians for this practice suggest a connection to the aesthetics of Greek Orthodox ecclesiastical music, and that perhaps the particular retuning of the laúto's drone string is a link to Anatolian saz, Turkish lute, performance practice. Only one particular modal category of Cretan dance melodies is subjected to this dual modal treatment. These melodies belong to a mode roughly analogous to the Western Phrygian, or major scale beginning on the third degree. For example, a typical melody in this category would contain the pitches G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, and F, and clearly treat the G as the fundamental, there resolving the majority of musical phrases, like so. Byzantine Greek Orthodox chanters would classify these melodies as belonging to what they refer to as the first plagal mode. And according to Ottoman and Arabic classical music theory, they belong to the family of makamlar, plural of makam, or mode, that includes kurdi, ajem kurdi, evich, and segach. The particular Phrygian melodies examined here, many of which are among the most canonical tunes in the repertoire of traditional musicians in Chania, are subjected to two distinct modal treatments, defined by the drone note played on the laúto, and any particular melody of this type may, in different situations, be treated in either fashion. One approach is for the laúto to drone on the pitch suggested as the fundamental by the contours of the melody, the note on which the musical phrases resolve. For example, a melody containing the previous pitches and resolving on the G would be played with the laúto droning on the open G string. Melodies treated in this way are generally played with their fundamental on G or D, which correspond to the two middle strings of the laúto. In the second modal approach commonly applied to these melodies, the laúto, instead of emphasizing the fundamental suggested by the melody, drones on a pitch 2 whole steps below the fundamental. The same melody in the previous example would thus be most commonly played using the notes B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and A, with the laúto striking the open G string as a drone. A third hybrid approach, used when playing melodies using these same pitches, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and A, as in the previous example, involves retuning the laúto's C string, the inside string, on which melody is never played, to B, thereby giving the option of striking both the open B and open G. This effect, which suggests both fundamentals and is thus often modally ambiguous, is strikingly reminiscent of the so-called misket tuning used by Turkish saz players in central Anatolia, or Asia Minor, when performing songs with similar Phrygian melodies. These songs are associated traditionally with the heroic Zeybek tribesmen, a nomadic ethnic group in central Turkey. What is most striking about the correlation between the B, G, D, A lauto tuning in the third example and the previously mentioned Anatolian misket tuning is that they are both used specifically and exclusively for performing the same type of melodies, those with a Phrygian character. This fact, when considered together with the instruments' relative similarities and the identical intervals of their tunings, seems to point to some connection between the two traditions that has somehow been preserved despite being lost in the rest of the Aegean, as this lauto tuning is unknown in other regions of Greece. It would be interesting to consider the possible role of the bulgari, a saz-like lute played in Western Crete until the mid-20th century in this process, but there are few recordings of the instrument, and on those that we do have of such Phrygian melodies, mostly played by Stelios Fustalieris of the city of Rethymno, the bulgari's three courses are tuned to a fifth and a fourth. For example, AEA on Fustalieris' recording of Sandis Agapis Dakria, and G-sharp, D-sharp, G-sharp on To Meriklidiko Puli. Another, perhaps somewhat whimsical possibility concerns the word misket itself, which in Turkish refers to the sweet muscat grape. When I asked older Chania musicians, whom I interviewed, why they use this particular tuning for the Phrygian melodies, the answer invariably came, quote, because it sounds sweeter. Of course, this could be very well be a coincidence, as sweetness is a quality frequently ascribed to a pleasing musical sound. However, the choice of the word sweet, gliko, rather than the myriad of other possible adjectives, does raise the question of some possible region-wide aesthetic property associated with these particular melodies, perhaps widely held in former times and now living on through oral tradition. It is aesthetics that points to another possible explanation for these choices between differing modalities. When choosing how to define the modality of a Phrygian melody, older Chania musicians display a marked preference for one or the other approach based on tempo and other aesthetic qualities. When playing at faster tempos, especially for dancing, there's a tendency to play these tunes with the drone 2 whole steps below the melody's fundamental, the major third approach, generally with the melody played on the notes B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, and the lauto's open G string as the drone, which we heard before. One reason for this may be the louder, open sound of the lauto in this position, as both the G and D strings, the new fundamental and fifth, are open and ringing below the melody. Another is simply that this major sound is considered more joyful and exuberant throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, just as it is in European and Western music, and therefore lends itself to faster, danceable tempos. And we must not overlook the misket tuning's association with the heroism and bravery of the Zeybek lair. On the other hand, when these tunes are played at a slower tempo for listening and singing, and especially when the lauto is playing solo rather than accompanying the violin, there is a marked preference for the other approach. The drone in this case is the fundamental suggested by the melody, most often a G drone under the melody played on the notes G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat, and F. This particular approach ensures the lowest, most resonant sound that the instrument is capable of producing. In addition, in this situation, the lauto player generally will play the melody on the octave D string rather than the unison A string, producing a more resonant and acoustically interesting sound. It is also easier to play the melody on the D string at a slower tempo since this bass string is thicker and heavier, and the lauto player must avoid striking the A string with the pick. Chania musicians describe the sound and character, or ethos in Greek, of Phrygian melodies played in this manner with the word paraponiariko, which translates to plaintive, or literally complaining. And when singing them, tend to choose lyrics lamenting lost love, protesting the cruelties of the world, philosophizing about mortality and other such subjects, often addressing God and demanding an explanation for human suffering. As stated above, the particular modality resulting from this approach is analogous to Byzantine liturgical music's so-called first plagal mode, when chanted with the ison or drone on the fundamental suggested by the contours of the melody. This mode is always chanted at a slow tempo, particularly for the stichira hymns of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and is thought to invoke a contemplative, prayerful state, fit for beseeching God in a calm and humble manner. It stands to reason that there may indeed be some connection between this ecclesiastical music practice and the Chania musician's preference to play slow Phrygian melodies with the drone on the melody's fundamental. This phenomenon of the shifting fundamental in the traditional dance music of Western Crete perhaps tells us something about the connections between aesthetics, modality, history, and organology in the Eastern Mediterranean. By means of this shifting fundamental and the resulting modal chains, musicians are able to manipulate a single melody to conform to the aesthetic needs of various situations. The vastly different characters of the two modes in question and their popular interpretations, introspective and plaintive on the one hand, joyous and exuberant on the other, raise various questions about the practical function of the modal system in the Eastern Mediterranean, particularly concerning the seemingly unique bimodality of these Phrygian melodies. The methods used by lauto players in Western Crete to negotiate this bimodality and their possible connection to Anatolian saz performance practice raise other, perhaps more ambitious questions about historical movement of musical ideas through related instruments and invite an examination of other modal traditions of the region, in Persia, the Balkans, Armenia, and the Arab world, and the treatment of similar melodies.